Ajnanatirandasya jnanajanashalakaya chakshurum militam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha. So, we continue with the Bhagavad Gita reading. We were on chapter 7, verse 18 today. Udhara sarva evetam jnani tvatmeva me matam ashita sahi yukkatma mame vanuttamam gatim. Those who approach me are all noble people, but I see the jnani as my very self. For such a person is steady and exclusively devoted to me as the highest goal. So, two things to understand. By saying, first of all, that all people who approach him are noble, and yet drawing the distinction towards the jnani as being of a higher nature, so to speak, he's essentially saying that although externally two people may do the same thing, depending on the inner state of the person, I receive it differently. I see it differently, I therefore measure it differently, classify it differently. And the differentiating factor here between the two figures that he chooses to speak of is not intention or nobility or whether it is good or bad. It is whether one knows in truth what is happening and one doesn't. So it is a question of knowledge. It is a question of understanding. But naturally, we're not talking about information. It's not superficial knowledge. It is something more profound. It is a knowing. And so, when Krishna equates himself to the jnani, he says, I see my very self in that jnani. Again, the distinction was drawn the other day, I believe Swami Kanchalochana, when he last spoke on the Gita. When Krishna mentions jnani in chapter 7, he isn't referring to those who practice jnana yoga as a means to attain liberation. He means one who has Brahma Gyan, so knowledge of the self, knowledge of the transcendental platform. So therefore, when Krishna equates himself to such a being, what he's really saying is, because that person has transcended superficial understanding and approaches me from a spiritual position, I see such a person from a spiritual perspective. We meet as spirit. It is Atma meeting Paramatma. It is not a mind and body meeting Paramatma in disguise. So you have to understand that this is something that is prevalent throughout spirituality. The trapping of seeing two things that look very similar externally but are completely different internally. And being here in Vrindavan is actually a wonderful opportunity to explore that subject. Because, as you know, you are seeing so many things here. Our senses are being constantly overwhelmed, right? Sight, noises and smells and whatever else we're encountering. And we are invited, therefore, to make assumptions or to make opinions about this place, about whatever it is that we see, based on what our information, what our sensory perception is telling us. And so even though we come here for the right reasons, we come here with the right intentions, we want to continue to progress, we want to continue to develop our bhakti, because we are still bound to our superficial understanding of things, no matter how well intended we are, we can't help but formulate certain judgments. You cannot help but formulate certain opinions, and those judgments and opinions end up being barriers to your real understanding of the situation. They end up becoming curtains to your spiritual eye. So instead of seeing what the saints claim to see, instead of seeing what the devotees claim to see, you're left mystified saying, why don't I see? Because that is the easier question to ask. The question is to externalize it and say, well, there must be something wrong, or it's my karma, or it's all of those mysterious things. Those are the things that we're going to blame. But we're going to formulate judgments. And judgments cloud vision, cloud understanding. When you take, for example, when you meet somebody, how quickly you form an opinion about that person, right? From what? From getting to know the person? No, just from the way the person looks. You've already made an opinion, right? And maybe that opinion will develop the more you interact with the person. But have you noticed how that first opinion that you make, based on what you saw, any future interaction you have with that person is now being measured against that first opinion. So that first opinion is like a wall, is like a barrier, and they have to prove themselves to be different to that opinion which you made. You don't give people an open, free chance to actually show you who they really are. Our mind works this way. It formulates judgments, and then it says, prove this judgment wrong. Or it rejects to see anything beyond that judgment. It says, I have already understood. That's the label I have given it. Right? This is how we work, and it is so incredibly limiting. And so how does that work in the realm of religion and spirituality, or even Vaishnavism and Bhakti? It works in the sense that we look at Krishna, we look at his leelas, we read about what is right, what is wrong, what is Dharma, what is Adharma, what is Guru, what is not a Guru. And these ideas that are passed on into our minds start to crystallize individually in our own brains differently. Right? How you understand something is different to how I understand it, how someone else will understand it, correct? But now, instead of seeing something as it is, you will only see it through that crystallization of your thoughts. Which means, whatever you have come to convince yourself of, that Krishna should be, that God should be, that Dharma should be, that righteousness should be, that spirituality should be, that's what you measure all your spiritual experiences against. And we all do this. I do it too. When I look at these saints we go to visit, when we visit new pilgrimage places, other gurus, other missions, in my mind, the first thing that happens is comparison. How does that fit into my vision? Or Guruji's vision, however you want to call it. In truth, it's always our vision. Because who can claim to have Guruji's vision, right? Nobody. So it's our understanding of what we think Guruji's vision is. Right? So I'll look at some saint and I'm like, what's his philosophy? Is it the same as Guruji's? No. Then he doesn't know what he's talking about. As if I know what I'm talking about. But yet the judgment is made. Because in my mind, it is crystallized, I know something. Just that statement of I know formulates a wall that prevents me from actually getting to know. You see what I'm saying? By convincing yourself you know, you actually prevent you from really knowing. And so you have this in so many parts of our life. I know Guruji being the worst one. This is the worst possible wall. Because he actively seeks the people who have done that and just to smash it. Every time he hears, he has this amazing radar. It's the I know radar, right? And he feels one of you is in any way beginning to convince oneself that, yeah, I know how Guruji is. I know how he thinks or how he teaches or whatever. He'll just come and just bang you on the head next. Because that is actually his service. Because he's saying by removing that concept, then you may actually come to know. Understand? And so you have to keep putting these barriers down. If you actually want to come to know Vrindavan, you have to remove the concept that you already know it based on what you have seen. If you actually want to know Krishna, you have to remove the concept that tells you you know him based on what you've already seen. So actually, when you engage with these leaders, when you engage with his name, it's not just knowing, it's also feeling, right? You also have to feel it. And you have to trust that feeling more than you trust your knowing. And your knowing should only be there to attract you more and more so that you may one day truly know. Truly realize. Your mind is being tempted in so many different directions, right? All the time, 24/7. One devotee once told me very harshly and I listened to some degree, I hope, when I was younger and was not a Swami. Devotee came up to me and said, "What are you doing sitting here in the corner doing nothing?" It was a Guruji darshan, and I was just in the corner sitting with my friends chatting. And the devotee said, "You are spiritual. You're a devotee of Guruji. You should be there preaching to these people, talking to them about Guruji and God. Because if you're not doing it, then the world will preach its philosophy to you. Because the world's philosophy is very clear. If you're not preaching your philosophy to the world will preach its philosophy to you. There's no off button. If your mind is not immersed in spirituality or in Guruji or in our teachings or in our practices and our sadhana, then it's going to be automatically immersed in something else. There's no off button. There's no let's immerse it in nothing. Right? And so you have to become keenly aware that every moment you are not immersing it in the right thing, you're actually taking steps backwards. And that seems very negative or very scary, but it's just fact. It's the way the mind works, and there's so many ways to prove that. The mind never stands still. If you read a book and then you stop halfway through, you leave for 1 month, come back, you cannot continue from that page. You've forgotten so many things, you have to start again. Right? So when your mind is on something, good, progress is being made. When the mind goes to something else, it starts to replace that thing. Today, we met one gentleman. He said, "Oh, where are you guys from?" "Germany. I used to speak German." And I said, "What do you mean used to?" And he said, "Well, 30 years ago." So why do you think he forgot? Because for 30 years he didn't need it. So he was just using other things. And those things replace that. And so when he now needs that, it's gone. It's not there. Right? Imagine now, it's not something so innocent and useless as German. It's God, the name of God. It's the teachings of your guru. You don't think about them, and so when you then need them, you go, "Oops, I forgot." It's the same thing. It's the same mind. If you don't constantly use it and engage with it, you will forget. This is automatic, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. And what you most certainly can't do is say, "Guruji, why didn't you remind me in that moment?" So, the big trick of spirituality, where people always slip up, is that our lives are generally not that problematic, or at least not that incredibly dramatic. And so we don't necessarily feel the fire under our bums to motivate us to do things. And so we kind of take it easy. And then when the bad situation happens, you go, "Whoops, I wish I had prepared better." But then it's always too late, right? You're always looking back going, could have, should have, right? And so the trick, Guruji has always said, is stay ready so that you don't have to get ready, right? If you're always ready, then whenever life hits you with something difficult, or whenever the challenge arrives, or whenever God chooses to reveal himself to you, you won't miss it. Because you are ready. So again, I take it back to the verse. The verse essentially says, it's not about what you do, it's with what inner state do you do. And this is not karma yoga. I'm not talking about detachment. I'm talking about realization, understanding. When you are sitting here with your guru, do you understand what is happening? When you're sitting here in a temple, to what extent do you understand what is happening? And you don't have to make this too mystical. I'm not trying to make this seem like very far away from you. No, it's actually possible to grasp this to quite some good degree. You're sitting here in the temple, so you're actually spending time with God. Therefore, you should pay attention to Him. You should converse with Him. You should engage in His direct service. Singing for Him, clapping for Him, dancing for Him, looking at Him. Immerse your senses in Him. Because that is the time of day where He opens His curtains to be with you. Right? Even that understanding is already better than coming here because it is the proper religious thing to do. We go to temples and we pray as communities. Everybody can do that. But just that extra little understanding will already improve your experience 10 times. It's the same thing with japa. When you say, I do my japa to calm my mind, but then you don't have to chant Om Namo Narayanaya. You don't have to chant Vittala. You can also chant hello, 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 hello. It's the same principle. If you only chant one thing in your mind, then you can't think of other things. Your mind will be calm. This is not the point though, is it? The point of japa is not make your mind calm. The point of japa is bring you closer to God. Immerse this mind in God. So therefore we chant Om Namo Narayanaya. And what are we saying? I am appealing to the Lord that resides within every single atom around me. So wherever I am, if I'm in Greece, if I'm in Brazil, if I'm in America, I will look around and think, my Lord is here with me. Om Namo Narayanaya. And I am within Him. It is an idea and concept of God that transcends time and space. And if you go into that mindset when you're doing your japa, like Guruji says, you visualize your deity, how much more fruitful it will be than just saying, I'm here to calm my mind. Right? And the difference between the two, from the outside, zero. It's just two people walking down the same street with the same mala bag in their hand, doing exactly the same number of malas, 16 rounds. And then you say, but I have done 16 rounds every day. Why I'm not like this one? Because you don't understand. You don't do it the right way, you don't get the right result. And then whose fault? So it's not finger pointing, it's you have to highlight the difference so that you can make the change. Understand? So I want to read you a verse from the Bhagavatam. In Canto 2, chapter 5, verse 16, it says the following. Narayana paro yogo, Narayana param tapaha, Narayana param jnanam, Narayana paragati. It means all different types of meditation or mysticism are only means for realizing Narayana. All austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. Culture of transcendental knowledge is for getting a glimpse of Narayana, and ultimately salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. What this verse is saying is, imagine if everything you did it only for Narayana. There is no this purpose or that purpose, or this is a secondary benefit or this benefit. How many of you do Atmakriya Yoga? Okay. And be honest now, how many of you were attracted by benefits other than Narayana? Karma burning, calming of mind, mastery of body and senses and all this. Right? Me too. Right? Burning karma, though, that sounds cool. I've probably collected quite a bit. But here we understand what is the real purpose of this. It says all mysticism, all meditation, all transcendental knowledge, all austerities are for one purpose and one purpose only. To gain but a glimpse of Narayana. Because I tell you one thing, you may be vegetarian, you may be a very good person, you may be humble, you may be kind, but if you die and you have not come to know Narayana, you just start again. And then I ask you only then, what is the value of all that? We do preach it, don't take it wrong now, don't misunderstand me to say, don't be kind, don't be vegetarian, don't do all these things. But they are so basic in comparison to realizing Narayana. And so don't think, as tempting as it is, and I mean that from a space of empathy, because you have introduced one of those things into your life, that you have made great progress. You have made great progress when you can start to tell yourself how many things a day you do for Narayana. And only for Narayana. Whatever you want to conceive of Narayana. You see, today, we visited the number one place for this. Number one, which is Govardhan. Because the entire Govardhan Leela teaches us one thing. Love what you do. You don't need to chase anything else. God will manifest Himself precisely there. See, if you're familiar with the story in the Bhagavatam of Giridhari, what happens is, so Indra is receiving the yearly puja from the villagers, right? Why? Because he gives them rain, so that they can farm and lead their lives as they decided to. Great. What does Krishna tell them? Wrong. Don't do this. What does he tell them to do instead? Why don't you worship Govardhana mountain? Because after all, it is this mountain that actually gives you your livelihood. This is where you work. This is where your cows graze. You are cow herders. Why not love your job instead of loving the boss that gives you the job, so to speak? Why don't you just love what you do? And there itself you will find God. And what is the proof? Krishna assumes Govardhan as his own form. Krishna is Paramatma, he transcends everything, and he manifests himself in Govardhan. It literally comes to life to say, look, it's not just words I'm saying. God reveals himself not in a person, not in an avatar, in a mountain. He says, I'm also here. And so what that story tells us is, you don't need to run to find God in mysterious places. You don't need to run to find God in ashrams or temples, although that's a very nice thing to do also. If you are able to truly love what you do and worship what you do for Narayana, it is as an offering to Narayana, to Shri Krishna. You think Narayana will not come because you're doing it to the wrong place? He says, oh, I really see you have good love and really good intentions, but you did it at the wrong address. You're doing it to a mountain instead of the temple. Sorry. No realization for you. Right? This makes no sense.
Is there something else I can help with?
This makes no sense. So therefore, please understand something. When you come here, when you're at home, there should be no difference in your attitude. What this place has, that your home perhaps doesn't, is the ability to attract. Because of the history, because of the present, because of the Sangha, because of the collective energy of people living for God. Right? That is true. I will never take that away, because this is God's land. Right? But this is God's planet. This is God's universe. Literally, part of his body. So also, please don't get too swept up into that. The other day we heard Prithu speak about the glories of Vrindavan, right? I agree with that. Now, in juxtaposition, I will tell you also, don't fall too much in love with the glories of Vrindavan, because you don't live here. You get too happy here, you go home, you get depressed. What's the most famous t-shirt you buy in Brindavan? I lost my heart in Brindavan. Please don't. Maybe you can lose your shoes in Brindavan, that happens. And maybe, yeah, there's a t-shirt for that? Yeah. Buy that one. Then people might stop wearing shoes everywhere, it's a good advice. But don't lose your heart here, please. Because you have to go on and live your lives where God has placed you. You have to do your Dharma, and hopefully you'll do it with your hearts. Hopefully you'll do it present in that moment, not dreaming somewhere else, because that's ungrounded. Right? So enjoy every second you're here, because this place can reward you so much. But hopefully you will enjoy just as much when you're back home. When you're in your work office, when you're in your home kitchen. Because although you may not be cooking for a beautiful deity and saying it's prasad, you can bring that reality to yourself just by changing your mindset, just by changing your understanding. Nothing outside of you has to change. Everything inside has to. But this doesn't happen with a magic wand. This happens by you thirsting for that change, thirsting for that understanding, pursuing that understanding, listening attentively when that understanding is given. Please, if there's one thing that I believe you should learn, and I say this, yes, it's me preaching to you now, but I really do mean it. Learn to listen better. Because the number of times Guruji has sat on various asanas worldwide and said things only for me to 5 minutes later hear the same thing supposedly being told by one devotee to another, and I'm thinking, what? Were we in two different rooms hearing two different satsangs? That's not at all what Guruji said. We have to learn to listen to every word that is said. The good and what we perhaps don't like. Because that is therefore the complete teaching. If you only listen to what suits you, you are not listening to the teaching, you are making up your own. But your mind will convince you, it's Guruji's words, not mine. Because factually, well, he spoke them, but you're conveniently ignoring that he spoke 50% more than what you're remembering. I'll give you one example before we go. There was a question posed by a youth sangha member. We have youth sanghas every year in Jumpin in Germany, right? There was one year, one of the youth sangha participants asked Guruji a question. The question was, how do I become more disciplined? It's a good question, no? We're not very good at that, I believe, as human beings, not as devotees of Bhakti Marga, as human beings. And Guruji answered. And then the next day I knew I had a class with him, so I started the class by saying, what was Guruji's answer? And pretty much unanimously they all said, do your Jumpin. And then they sat there and smiled. Like this was somehow all that he said. And I said, yes, that was 1 out of 3 answers that he gave. What were the other 2? And you know what? Nobody could remember. Why? Because Jumpin is easy. Jumpin, most of them were already doing anyway. So what do you hear? You want to hear what is pleasing to you. So how to become disciplined? Please be something that I already do. Please be something easy. Please be something I already do. Please be something easy. Jumpin, bingo. You see? You see? And then you'll go around saying, you know what Guruji's teaching is for discipline? Jumpin. You're lying. You think you're telling the truth when in fact you're doing the exact opposite. You're lying. Because you're actually telling something that he didn't say. He said Jumpin plus. Right? And the minute there's a plus, you have to say the full thing. So his second answer that day was, be more introverted and less extroverted. Because the more extroverted you are, the more you have no control over your own self. Because you are literally placing yourself outside of your own being. You're literally giving it to the world and allowing the world to shape you however it wants to. And so sometimes if you want to really grow discipline, which means self-control, then control yourself. Be more within yourself rather than outside of yourself, right? There's sometimes this attraction to be the star of the show. So you need to be outgoing and very exuberant and all of this. Not the best for discipline. So that was the second part of the answer. Nobody wanted to hear that. Especially the extroverted people. And then his third answer. Self-analyze. Sit with yourself. Look at yourself neutrally. See the choices you make. And learn to make better ones. But he said literally every day. And so you think people wanted to remember that? I'm not even joking. When I said those things, they looked at me like, ah, oh yeah. Amazing. It was one night ago. It was the last night, literally, not even 24 hours had passed. Now, I'm not saying that it was anything unique to those people. It's our problem as human beings. Okay? So, you want to go from being the noble person, which you all are, for being here, I say this, that you are. But Krishna says, there's the noble person, and then there's the one who knows in truth what is going on. And the more you get closer to that, the more you're getting closer to his heart. And I believe that is something you all want. Therefore, please understand the need to thirst, to proactively look for that, and not to be passive, thinking that the externalities that you're doing are somehow enough. You read about the saint. What did the saint do? He did japa. I do japa. He went to the temple. I go to the temple. But when I ask Guruji, are we therefore similar? He laughs in my face. You may do the same things outside, but what's inside your mind, Swami Revatikaanta? Dinner? For how many people is that the answer right now? Right? And this is my point. No criticisms. It's also on my mind. But we're sitting in Vrindavan, sitting in the temple, listening to Bhagavad Gita satsang. And as human as we are, we're thinking, what's for dinner? Therefore, even if outside you may be doing the right things, take a closer look at what's happening inside of you. Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev, you shouldn't clap. Because clapping is, in many ways, pretty much the opposite spirit of what we're trying to really do here. First of all, I or whichever speaker is here doesn't need it. Second, we're in the temple of God, so we don't tend to glorify other people other than God and Guru in the temple. And lastly, this wasn't a performance. Yeah? I was trying to teach you something useful for yourself, so no need for clapping. Thank you very much.